From SBS, this is World News Australia.
Well, joining me now live is Uthman Badar from the Australian branch of Hizb ut-Tahrir, which has tonight released a statement about the events. Mr. Badar, you released this statement tonight referring to the large-scale and praiseworthy reaction from Muslims globally to this film. This statement came out hours after the suicide attack in Kabul, which killed at least 12 people. Do you include that attack when you call the reaction praiseworthy?
Well, to be honest, Cathy, I just heard about the suicide attack as I've entered your studio. By and large, Muslims both globally and locally have responded to the insults to the Prophet, which is really a red line for Muslims and will not be tolerated. And by and large, their response has been intellectual and political, and it's been peaceful. It's unfortunate the focus of media coverage has been on the minority, which has been violent protest. And I should be very clear, there are insinuations that somehow we support violent protests or what took place here on Saturday, which is completely and utterly untrue. Anyone who would have seen those scenes would have been concerned, and that includes us. But what we're saying is, let's talk about the real issues to understand why these things are happening.
What are those real issues that you're talking about?
Well, I mean, if we step back here, Cathy, we've had a film. There's two ways to look at this. People can say, or some people do say, you know, random guy makes a random film and the entire Muslim world erupts. And I think that's quite superficial. It doesn't answer anything. Rather, what we're saying is that this film is a trigger that brings to the fore more deep-seated issues, tensions between the Muslim world and the West, or Western governments in particular, tensions defined by, you know, Western foreign policy, American continuous intervention. You know, people ask, why America? Why is the US administration being targeted? They didn't make the film, they didn't improve the film. Now, and even though, you know, I would say they justified it in the name of just freedom of expression, but the point is there's a history here. There's Muslim anger on the street because of Afghanistan, Iraq, Guantanamo Bay, Bagram Air Base, you know, torture by rendition, political subjugation, supporting dictators, and it goes on and on.
But you say their random guy makes random film and it's a trigger, but why allow it to be a trigger when really, if it didn't spread this way, most people in the world would have never heard of this film?
That's another excellent question, but I'll give you a very practical example here. Most people might not know that on Saturday night, when these protests took place in Sydney, in Perth, very similar incidents occurred. 500 teenagers, partygoers, out of control, throwing bricks and bottles and rocks at police, mounted horsemen called in, one guy got stabbed, ambulance came to help injured, smashed. Now, those riots, or those incidents, were not dubbed the Perth riots. Politicians didn't fall over each other to condemn them. Federal Parliament didn't deem it necessary to be raised in question time and to forward bipartisan condemnation. Community leaders in Perth, in Kayara waters where it took place, were not asked to condemn it, you know, and they didn't feel the need as a community or parents as a community to condemn it. So where's the difference? Who's deciding where the focus is? It's media. And so what I'm saying, what we said in the release was that it's easy to scapegoat individuals. It's easy to thereby then, you know, blame an entire community, but really those who should be held accountable here are the powerful institutions, media and the political establishment.
But those events that you describe in Perth, while violent, were also isolated here in Australia, whereas the protests that we saw in Sydney were part of a worldwide reaction to this film, which could have global repercussions. Is it not fair enough then to cover these protests and highlight that they were violent?
Well, absolutely, but see, this is the thing, there's two different points here. On the one hand, the question is, are we concerned about the violence? You know, the Prime Minister came out, the Foreign Minister came out and said, oh, we can't accept violence. Barry O'Farrell said, this is not Libya, this is not Egypt. You know, if it's the violence, then well, there was violence in Perth. But you're right, there's a bigger context, and that's what we're saying. There's a global context here. If you want to understand why the Muslim street is angry, then know that the Prophet is very, very close and dear to hearts of 2 billion Muslims around the world, right? People say freedom of expression. You know, freedom of expression is a false notion. No one has absolute freedom of expression. If you discredit the American flag, you'll be in court. In the UK last week, a Muslim was convicted for inflammatory and inappropriate messages because he said something about dead soldiers in Afghanistan. Here in Australia, if Muslims on Anzac Day, for example, you know, went to an Anzac Day parade and hurled insults at, you know, Anzac soldiers, what do you think would happen? So the question here is, you know, Salman Rushdie's there saying that the key to a society is people should be able to say what they want. Freedom to insult is not a respectable way to live.
Okay, Uthman Badar, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Cathy.